Have you ever dreamed of escaping your busy life and moving to a tiny, crumbling countryside castle, but with excellent plumbing and a really great cup of tea? Maybe, like me, you've had one of those days where the meetings seem endless and the emails just keep piling up. Well, let me show you how one sim answered that question and how it changed absolutely everything. By the way, if cozy castles and flower-filled gardens are your thing, I would absolutely love it if you like this video and hit subscribe. It really does help the channel so much. And as a thank you for subscribing, here's a picture of a polar bear rolling in the snow. Our sim, she very much had one of those lives. She wasn't unhappy exactly, but she was tired and she wanted to move towards meaning. Up until very recently in Oasis Springs, she'd been working hard in her corporate job. She'd been raising her family. She'd been doing everything right. But now her children have grown and they've flown the nest. Maybe her job doesn't give her the same fulfillment that it did 5, 10, 15 years ago. And she's looking and she's ready for something new. Have you ever had an experience when you're in a pivotal stage like that and the universe just drops something, a real gift in your lap? Well, that's exactly what happened next for our sim. One day, a letter arrived, just like it does in the movies. A distant relative, a strange inheritance. And just like that, she's the proud owner of a beautiful but slightly derelict castle in Windenburg. And that castle is what we are going to build today. So as I say, I built this tiny castle in Windenburg, which I believe was supposed to be based on Germany in terms of the landscaping and the other architecture around that area. In my head, this sim moved from somewhere like Oasis Springs. Now, still beautiful, very much so in its own way, but hot and dusty and deserty. Very different from Windenburg. And this new world, this transition, helped her get the new start that she was looking for. I'm imagining we're building this at a time when she's been there a little while, she's had the time to do some renovations, given it some personal touches. So this is essentially a castle conversion. Now, home conversions are one of my favorite things to look at. I just love when people do it in a way that's sensitive to the original architecture and the story of the build, but treat it like this is the building's new chapter. So they breathe new life into it, add a little bit of their personality without taking away from what's originally there. And I think that's what our sim tried to do here as well. She is a modern lady. There are definitely going to be some modern touches in here, but we're also going to keep what I imagine would have been some of the original features of the build as well. So maybe she lovingly restored some of the walls or the floors or the doors and windows, that type of thing, whilst at the same time adding some modern but cozy touches of her own. I really enjoyed blending traditional castle elements with modern new features and ideas. If you have the Sims 4 tiny living stuff, you can build a tiny home residential, which is very similar to a regular residential lot, but with a few differences. There are 3 tiers for a tiny home residential. There's a micro home, which is the smallest. Then there's a tiny home, which is tier 2. And then there's a 3rd tier, which is a small home. And each tier has its own benefits. This is going to be a tier 2 tiny home, which means it has to be under 64 tiles in total. And then it comes with the following features. Lighten the load, which reduces our bills. Feeling fine all the time. Don't know why I have to say it like that. That's 2 times duration to happy, inspired, and focus buffs. You got the touch, which is 2 times boost to all skill building. I love that one. That one might be the best one. And then there's cozy comforts. All comfort boosting objects double their comfort buff. So whilst a tiny home does certainly come with some challenges, it also does come with a lot of benefits as well. In fact, for this particular tiny home, we managed to do it in 45 tiles. I was quite pleased with that. I think for the most part, we managed to make it feel cozy and snug without it being too claustrophobic or overcrowded. Now, what I'm doing here, and what I have been doing for some time, is attempting to build a round tower. If you have spent any time at all playing with the curved walls in The Sims 4, you might be aware that they can be a little bit difficult to manage. But I just had such a strong vision for this build that I really wanted to at least try. And I must admit, I did have a few moments where I nearly gave up. I think it was the stacking of the curved walls, one on top of the other, that was challenging. And then also getting it to match and coincide with this rectangle section that we have. Getting those two shapes to blend together was not an easy process. But to be honest, I just couldn't bring myself to give up on something that I felt had so much potential. Once I did manage to get it together though, once I get it together, get the build together, not get myself together, although that was part of it too. Once I did manage to bring it all together though, I was really happy with how it looked, especially when the roof was on and we have that lovely circular roof piece there. I just think it looks so gorgeous and medieval. I made the roofs quite tall to give an added sense of grandeur. I am very much of the feeling that every good castle needs a moat. Yes, back in the day, very much for defense, but now for this particular build, I think it's more for whimsy, for charm. I imagine that this moat is just full of life, full of tadpoles and frogs and fish and ducks and and there's a whole animal community that live down here. Actually, I think this entire lot would be full of wildlife. And then of course the other great thing about this moat is that it allowed us to have quite a grand entrance between the two sections, these lovely steps leading up onto the hill. But of course, this isn't just a tiny home, this is a castle tiny home. As if the tiny home and the tower weren't enough, this is also going to be a castle. So I did pull as much as possible from the castle estate kit. And I must say, to me, this kit is an absolute dream. It's full of grand arches and leaded glass and stone everywhere. And you'll see a little bit later, I blended some of these lovely features with some get-together features. For example, some of those lovely wallpapers and textures that we can see all around us in Windenburg to kind of anchor it into this world. Let me know, do you have the castle estate kit? Do you think it would be one that you would use very often? And if so, what's your favorite piece from it? I have a few friends who have downsized or maybe they've gone RVing, and in the process of doing those things, they've had to or chose to let go of quite a lot of physical possessions. And almost everyone who I've spoken to who's been through this process has said what a wonderful, liberating, freeing thing it is to do. Now, I'm very much someone who loves my knickknacks. I love my stuff. If I would let myself be, I would probably be a little bit of a hoarder. So I think I would find this process challenging, but it's also quite intriguing. What is it that's so freeing to people about letting things go? Perhaps it's something to do with the fact that the things that you then choose to hold on to all hold a purpose or a story or a feeling, and suddenly you're just surrounded by options that you love. And in that empty space where all the clutter was, it creates more room for what matters. Let me know, is this a process that you've been through, or is it something that maybe you think you would like to do? Or like me, is it something that seems a little bit foreign and strange to you? I would love to know your thoughts. But anyway, I think this is a process that our sim has gone through. I imagine that she had quite a large, sprawling home in Oasis Springs, and it was full to the brim of stuff, things that have just accumulated over the years. So I think she probably spent quite a lot of time going through it all, donating things, only bringing with her those most important items, and throughout that process she now feels like she can breathe again, like she can come up from under the weight of all that stuff, she can resurface and she can breathe again. It's a true reset. And also, let's face it, it's only 64 tiles. She is not going to have space for all that stuff, even if she wanted to. And since she's been here, I imagine she's probably gathered anything additional that she's needed from maybe second-hand shops or markets, maybe from some new local friends. I don't know about you, but I've always wanted a lofted bedroom. I think there's something very magical and enchanting about the idea, as well as very cozy and homey. What do you think? Have you ever had a lofted bedroom? Would you like one? Or do you prefer more separation between your bedroom area and your living spaces? I would love to know. Now, the kitchen was quite a tricky blend to get right. You'll see I put down some initial ideas here, mostly just to map out the space, but also I thought maybe we could lean in this kind of rustic horse ranch direction. But I do come back and change these a little bit as I think on it more and as we pin down the vibe. Do you ever find when you're building in The Sims that sometimes you just need to get one or two pieces right, and then from those pieces it's like everything else just starts falling into place? Well, that happened after I put down this initial kitchen, so we do change this, although the general layout does stay the same. I realized that back wall behind the kitchen would probably be, if we were in the real world would probably be south facing because the afternoon sun hits the building at that angle. So I thought we probably ought to have at least one window on it in this main rectangular area to let that sunlight stream in. Getting the size of the window right was important though, because I didn't want to have too big a window and then we have to compromise on storage because this is such a small space. I go for a mix of cabinets and open shelving. I thought it would be very important to have some space where she could shut things away, but also where she could actually display some things that she really loves and maybe some things that she wants easily to hand as well. So I thought this was a nice balance for our kitchen. We were speaking a little earlier about how I thought she would maybe collect and curate things. I didn't think she'd go to maybe a department store and pick out a matching set or something like that. That's maybe something that she might have enjoyed doing when she lived back in Oasis Springs. But here, I think she's probably captivated by these little markets, maybe some thrift shops or antique shops, something like that. And she finds some pieces that she feels like have a story, and she feels passionately that she maybe wants to restore them or breathe new life into them by having them in this new space. So I went for a couple of mismatched armchairs to kind of give a nod to the fact that maybe she got them from two different places or two different people, or maybe she got them from the same place, but that person had got them from two different places. And then I found this brilliant little coffee table. It was just the right size for this space, and it has some books on the lower level below it, and I thought that was so perfect. I imagine that our Sim has always wanted to be a reader. She is a reader, but she maybe doesn't have time or doesn't feel like she can prioritize her time for that in the past. So now that she's got a little bit more breathing space, I think that she would spend a lot of time engrossing herself in a book. And so she's piled up under this little coffee table some books that are on her to-read list. I just thought that was a great part of the storytelling for this Sim and this phase of her life. And then I thought, what else? What else would she want to do in this space? She would read, she would chill out. She would probably also drink her morning, afternoon, maybe her evening chamomile tea in this spot, sitting in one of those comfy armchairs. And so I spent a little while going through a few different teapots because I think a person's teapot can tell you a lot about them. Is it sleek and modern and sophisticated? Or is it a little bit crooked or quirky or maybe a little bit unexpected? And what I went with in the end was quite a modern design, and I really liked that I put down 2 teacups because even though she lives here on her own, and even though this is a fresh start for her, this is a new place, and maybe she doesn't know anyone at first, I feel like the world of Windenburg would be quite friendly and warm and welcoming, and I think she would make friends really quickly, maybe even faster than she might expect. Perhaps she surprises herself, so maybe she has a friend who swings by and they have tea together once a day. I love the idea that maybe there's someone here who she's really bonded with. And then I also felt strongly that this little kind of living area would need a rug. I don't know if you've ever been in a castle for very long, but they can be quite cold. The materials do tend to keep out the heat, which is probably very nice on a summer's day. But for the winter, I thought maybe a nice rug would really help just kind of warm things up, especially underfoot. And I did decide in the end to go with a circular rug to match the circular tower. Sometimes I think it can work well to put different shapes together, like we did our circular tower and our rectangular room. But here I just really loved the way the rug mimicked the shape of the room so well. And one of the most joyful things about this choice for me was how I realized that the coffee table had a swatch that almost completely matched the rug swatch. Those 2 shades of purple just complemented each other so well. For me, like when I go thrift shopping, it's kind of like that as well. When you find 2 pieces from different worlds and then their stories come together in this new moment. I imagine that this would have been really pleasing for our Sim when she found this table and this rug and they worked together so well. I think that can be one of the biggest challenges when you're trying to make something look thrifted in The Sims, is that it doesn't just look like a mismatch. It looks like those pieces have been chosen with care. That's what I wanted to go for here. I think she would have chosen the things in her new life with very good care. And then these dining chairs were a moment for me when I kind of got the feeling of the overall vibes of the castle that she was going for, because they're soft, they're sweet, they are slightly royal. There is something a little bit grand about them as well, even within that cozy softness. And I thought that's so perfect. That is so perfect for our castle. Because let's face it, if there was ever a time to do something a little bit princessy, it's probably in the castle build, don't you think? And certainly this can happen in America too, but in European Korean countries, very often our dining space is also our workspace. So I put down an iPad, so this is somewhere maybe where she writes emails to her friends back home or her children back home. Or maybe she pays her bills or does her online banking here, things like that. And then as I say, she is a modern lady, so I think she would like a TV. I did put a TV over the dining area so you could sit in those armchairs and watch it. I was actually so pleased with how much I was able to fit in this little space, especially with those round walls. I know I keep mentioning them, but they can be a bit of a nightmare. However, in this case, I really do think this space works really well, despite and because of those walls. After trying quite a few different things, as you can see, I did settle on some kitchen cabinets that I thought maybe looked like they could have been built by a local carpenter. I like the idea that she used locally sourced materials and a local tradesperson. Maybe someone who's lived in the area since they were a child and they've always looked at this castle and wondered, ooh, who lives here? And thought about themselves slaying dragons in their imagination. There's buildings like that, aren't there, which, as well as belonging to the person who actually owns them, they also belong to the town. The stories, the imaginings, the history make it feel so strongly a part of the lives of the people who have lived there and grown up there. I remember there was one house in the village that I grew up that me and my friends just loved, and we would always look at it as we went past on our way to school and imagined ourselves living there, what we would do, how we would live. I think this castle is maybe a little bit like that for the local people living in Windenburg. Unfortunately, I did realize that that larger cabinet I have above the fridge there would in fact be useless if this was real life because of the way the tower curves around. And I really like that we have the full 360 tower on the top 2 floors, but because of the way that tower curves around, you wouldn't have been able to get the doors open. I don't know if that makes sense, but in the end, I had to go for a smaller cabinet that you could open underneath the ceiling or the wall of this rounded tower. So that's just another way in which the tower caused me problems. So she ended up with a little less storage space than I would have liked. So what do you think? Do you like this modern-ish kitchen in this older space? Does that work for you? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Before I started furnishing this bathroom, I did Google whether stone could be used in wet rooms, stone like this, because I thought it'd be a really lovely area to keep some of the original flooring and the original walls. And it turns out, yes, natural stone can be used in a wet room, but it does require diligent maintenance to make sure that it stays water resistant. So that was good enough for me, and we kept the original castle walls and castle floor, and we just imagined that she was fine with the maintenance. I'm really glad we did, because I think it adds a real coziness to this wet room. Now, as you can see, this is a tiny bathroom. That is not an exaggeration. I promise it is functional despite its tiny size. They can actually walk over those showers, so they can get in, they can get to the toilet, they can get to the sink, and then they can shower in the middle. I have play tested it, and I promise it does work, even though it doesn't look like it should. And I think this is probably the smallest way we could do a fully functional bathroom. I would be really interested to hear, do you think you could live in a tiny house like this? I think this bathroom would be the hardest thing for me, if I'm honest. I did try and give her as much storage as possible. You'll see she does have a full cabinet where she can keep things and store things under the sink. But even so, this is very small. I did stay in a hotel once where I had a bathroom probably not much bigger than this one, and it was a wet room like this. And the thing I disliked about it the most was that when you would shower, the toilet paper would get all wet, and there was nothing. I had to take the toilet roll out of the bathroom whilst I showered because I didn't like that the toilet roll would get so wet, and there was nothing else I could do about it. So here you'll see I positioned the toilet roll as far away from the shower as I possibly could, in the hope that if this were a real life situation, the spray from the shower wouldn't reach it. And I think just because something's small doesn't mean that it can't be beautiful and luxurious, right? So she has a beautiful bathroom cabinet, she has a beautiful bathroom sink and mirror, she has what I imagine would be very soft plush towels, just to make this room as special and as beautiful and as nice to be in as possible. I also added in what I imagined would be some lovely fragrances and soaps, so I think this would be a very nice smelling room as well. I did think maybe we should have a little hat stand or a little coat rack or something by the door, and you certainly could, but I couldn't find something that looked like it had pieces that I think this sim would choose to wear. And also, I didn't want to clutter up around the door too much. I always like when you walk into a house and it feels very light and bright and open, so in the end we don't have anything around the door, and I don't don't know if that feels a little bit untrue to you maybe. Whether, yeah, she would probably need somewhere to put her shoes and her coat and that kind of thing as soon as she walks in. Or whether in fact you agree and you think it's better to stick with the feeling of openness and space as much as possible in such a tiny room. I would love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in this situation? I did try and put some of these nice vines, ivy-like plants around the tower, and I loved how they look. But the trouble is, when I move object them into the right place, or what I felt was the right place, the trouble is you can then see them when you have half walls on at certain angles, and I think that would be just really annoying for gameplay. So reluctantly, I did delete a lot of the ivy. It's difficult because you want to go with what looks good, but then I think also it's very important to consider how it's actually going to feel when you're playing the game, of course. So that's why I delete a lot of this ivy, despite loving the way it looks. That being said, there was a lovely opportunity for it on the back wall. I think that looks so good on the back there. It really helps it feel like the castle has been here for quite some time and the ivy has grown and kind of taken over this part of the building. I wanted to find a light big enough and grand enough to fill up this vertical space within the tower, because it is a huge cavernous space for a tiny house. And I felt it was right to have something that matched the scale. So I went with this really nice kind of candelabra. Is that the word? I don't know if that's the word. Like this chandelier with candles. I thought that was very in keeping for the castle vibes. I mean, I imagine they're not actually candles because I don't think our sim could climb up there and light them. They're probably, those fake candles that flicker effectively. But nonetheless, I think this would look really good and really fit in the castle vibes, really help fill up and give some scale to that vertical space, whilst also having the candlelight, that flickering electric candlelight. I think that would still help that space feel very cozy and warm as well. I did play with the idea of maybe using some kind of white paneling that looked similar to the wall treatment that we have going behind the kitchen, that white wood that's on a lot of the Windenburg wallpapers. I thought it might be cool to imagine that she was able to repurpose some wood that she found a bit dilapidated in other areas of the castle, that she was able to clean it up and use it in the bedroom and kind of give that space its own vibe and its own slightly different feeling. So that's why you can see I'm looking at so many different white panelings. I'm trying to find one that matched, but I couldn't find one that matched absolutely perfectly. So in the end, I just used a different design of that. I'm just calling it the Windenburg wallpaper, that get together wallpaper. The ones with I think of them like arrows, they're like this. And I tried to create a different design in the lofted bedroom area to give it that different feeling, but still make sure it felt in keeping, like it tied in with the rest of the design. And then I chose a kind of what I think of as a smaller version of that larger candle chandelier. Is it called a candelier? I can't even think anymore. But a smaller version of that in the bedroom. I thought that was a really lovely way to tie the design together. In the end, I think this lofted bedroom is one of the most successful areas of the whole build, and I was a little worried about it because, as you can see, it is very small and that doesn't give her a lot of room to store her clothes and her shoes and just the things that she needs, despite downsizing her stuff, as we mentioned. But with a single bed, I was able to wiggle in a vertical one tile wardrobe that I think looks really nice in that space actually, and she could probably fit quite a few clothes in there in actuality. And then it's quite common for bedrooms in Europe to have inbuilt storage. A lot of my friends who had, box rooms as children, they would have this kind of inbuilt cupboard area going above their bed for additional storage and additional coziness. I think they look great. So that's what I tried to do here. I used the same style cabinets as we had in the kitchen because I like the thought that our carpenter did all the carpentry for the house and put 3 of them going along the top. I think she could fit so many things in here. And then she'd just have to carefully stand on the bed when she was getting things out and be very careful not to fall backwards. And then we did also put a little shelf above the bed for more books. But then also I thought it's kind of nice to have somewhere where you can put a glass of water at bedtime or whatever you need. Have that somewhere close because she doesn't have a bedside table, of course. There just wasn't room if she was also going to have a wardrobe. So I put that above the bed and I thought that was quite a good compromise. When you're doing a tiny build in The Sims, I think outdoor living is probably going to be an important important consideration. So eventually I do make this entire area on top of the hill. I flatten that out as much as possible and we use that as kind of an additional living space. So what I end up doing is I put a little work area outside the house, and we haven't actually spoken about this yet. As part of this slower, more intentional life, after probably decades of stress in her corporate job, I imagine that she still wants to be creative and have some kind of fulfilling work life. She's not ready to be a total lady of leisure just yet. I feel like maybe she's always had this goal to be a florist, a flower arranger. If you have the Seasons expansion pack, your Sims can actually learn the flower arranging skill and then they can sell their creations for a profit. And I think this would be a really lovely way to fulfill the need that she has to work and be productive, but in a more soothing, meditative way, and a way that connects her with nature as well. Perhaps when she arrived here, she didn't just inherit the crumbling old castle. She inherited a wild, overgrown garden that she's slowly and lovingly brought back to life. There's something quite sentimental about that, I think. It's almost like she's not just selling bouquets, but she's helping Sims find a way to say, I love you, I'm sorry, I miss you. I think that would give her a huge sense of purpose at this time in her life. And I think just practically for gameplay, this opens up a lot of options for us as well. So I put a little flower arranging station around to the right-hand side of the castle. I found this beautiful archway that's part of the romantic garden stuff. I don't know if you'd actually call it an archway. It's kind of like a recess, I suppose. And I thought it looked really, really good next to the castle. The stone blended in really well. And I thought this would be a great little nook for her to practice making her creations. So I put that around the side and I tucked the flower arranging table in underneath it. I thought this is where she can just be amongst nature and work and do something really fulfilling with her time. So she's got her table, she's got a few little pots where she can grow things. I thought this would add a lovely contrast with her life before, her life that was full of meetings and schedules and just her whole life she's had to be on as a cornerstone for her company and as a provider for her children. And now this is her time to do something that she really loves, especially coming from a world like Oasis Springs, which is very deserty and cactusy and those type of things. This is quite literally a whole new world for her of different types of blooms and wildflowers. And I can just imagine her arriving here and feeling totally inspired in a whole new way that she hasn't before. I can picture her standing outside this crumbling castle and overgrown garden and just thinking, yes, this is what I've been yearning for. We spoke earlier about making a grand entrance to our castle, and I can't think of many things that say grand entrance more than a beautiful water fountain plonked right down in the middle of the pathway. There's something quite sweet and soft about the thought of being welcomed home by the sound of flowing water. And you'll see I did go a little bit nuts with the wildflowers at the front of the lot, but I just felt like it needed it. It needed this meadow-like entrance, this abundance, to tell the story about how she was inspired to start her new path as a florist when she arrived here. So I did really enjoy having an excuse to go to town and put down a lot of these really lovely flowers. I think it does a great job of blending it into the rest of the world as well, because the world of Windenburg is very abundant with nature. And the other thing I do in a little bit to kind of help this is I used a lot of purple flowers closer to the castle, because I don't know if you can see, but there's a lot of purple around the lot as well. I do really enjoy trying to make the lots that I'm building look like they belong in the world as much as I can. Some of the builds that I've done that I feel are the most successful are the ones that almost improve at nighttime, and I really enjoyed putting little lighting moments around this castle to let it shine in the darkness. Unfortunately, and I know I keep complaining about the circular walls, I know I didn't have to use them, but one more complaint and then I'll stop, I promise. One final problem I had was that the circular walls seemed to be causing some distortion with the light. Some areas were illuminated and I had no idea why, and then they would just suddenly stop, like there was something invisible blocking them, blocking the light. So I did my best to use lighting to blur that a little bit and make it look more natural, more real. I did use a lot of the romantic garden stuff in this build. I just think think it gave the perfect vibes for this gorgeous castle. They added a real softness, a gentleness, and a romance to this build. I thought, how lovely would it be if we added another little gardening moment down by the moat? I thought that would be such a lovely place to sit and work, plant, watch the seeds grow, and then harvest. Just another space not only to build skill, but also for us Sim to sit and enjoy. I thought, how cool would it be if we could make it look like this staircase was built using local stone? Probably way back in the day. Maybe it had to be lovingly restored or touched up in modern times. So around the stairs, I placed lots of stones as a kind of nod to the idea that maybe these are all around in the environment. And back in the day, it was built by hand using these resources from the local area. It also really helped me to blend the slope a little bit because I wanted to have a few flowers up there, but the trouble was that they were floating a little bit because I couldn't quite get them to sit nicely on the slope. So the stones helped me kind of blend and disguise that was happening a little bit as well. If you like this build and you think you might want to play here, I'll put it on the gallery. I'll just call it Tiny Castle Home, or you can search for Sims Builds Chill to see all of my creations. If you like this, I think you'll love my fairy pub build too. It's full of community and magic and just the right amount of winged chaos. You can also find me on Instagram and X at Sims Builds Chill. I'll see you again soon.